In a dimly lit Hollywood studio in 1954, one of cinema's most beloved leading men sat in his dressing room, hands trembling as he attempted to remove his dentures. Blood pooled in the porcelain sink as infected gums sent waves of agony through his skull. Outside, thousands of fans screamed his name, believing they were witnessing perfection incarnate. They had no idea that their idol's famous smile was entirely artificial, that every kiss scene was torture, that the charm they adored was built on a foundation of excruciating pain. This wasn't an isolated incident. Across Hollywood's golden age, the industry's biggest stars were hiding disabilities, deformities, and chronic conditions that would have shocked their adoring public. Studios didn't just conceal these struggles, they weaponized them, using a star's desperation to hide their condition as leverage to control every aspect of their lives. What you're about to discover will forever change how you view classic cinema. Behind the glamorous facade of Hollywood's golden age lay a systematic exploitation of human vulnerability that turned physical differences into carefully guarded secrets, transforming the very adaptations these stars developed to survive into the iconic performance styles we still celebrate today. Stay with us as we unveil 10 shocking cases where Hollywood's biggest stars performed through unimaginable pain. And if these hidden stories move you, subscribe to join us in exploring the untold truths behind cinema's greatest legends. The manufactured beauty Rita Hayworth, pain behind the perfect face. Columbia Pictures didn't discover Rita Hayworth. They created her through a transformation so brutal it would be considered torture today. When studio head Harry Cohn first encountered Margarita Cancino, he delivered a devastating verdict, unmarketable with her Spanish features and ethnic hairline. What followed was Hollywood's most extreme makeover, performed without anesthesia in an era before medical oversight. Week after week for over a year, she endured electrolysis sessions that rewrote her very heritage. Electric needles burned her scalp inch by agonizing inch, raising her hairline by more than an inch to erase what executives deemed too ethnic for American audiences. The procedure was medieval in its cruelty. She would clench a towel between her teeth as technicians methodically destroyed hair follicles across her forehead. Blood often soaked through her blouses during these sessions, yet she never spoke publicly of the ordeal. "When I go to bed, I wait for the scabs to heal before I can sleep on that side," she confided to a makeup artist who noticed her wincing during routine touch-ups. But Rita's transformation extended beyond facial reconstruction. She suffered from a leg-length discrepancy that left her uneven and unsteady. Every glamorous high heel contained hidden orthopedic modifications, her left shoe built nearly an inch higher than her right. Those effortless dance sequences that made her famous required her to perform through searing hip pain as her body compensated for the structural imbalance. The psychological toll proved even more devastating than the physical agony. Studio handlers conditioned her to deny her own heritage, coaching her to respond with confusion if anyone inquired about her Spanish background. "They made me ashamed of who I was," she later told her daughter. "They said no one would desire a Spanish girl." The ultimate tragedy lay in the success of her transformation. After enduring agonizing procedures to become America's love goddess, Rita discovered that escaping her manufactured image proved impossible. The woman created through pain could never return to the girl who had existed before it. "Men go to bed with Gilda," she would famously lament, "but wake up with me." Yet even she no longer knew who that person was. The studio system had literally burned away her original identity, replacing it with a construct that brought fortune to everyone except the woman trapped inside it. The method of madness. Lon Chaney Sr. Self-inflicted torture as art. The man of 1,000 faces achieved his legendary transformations through self-imposed torture that permanently damaged his body and ultimately claimed his life. Born to deaf parents, Chaney's extraordinary facial control developed from communicating in sign language from infancy. But his most extreme character work transcended expression. It involved physical distortion that shocked even hardened film crews. For The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Chaney didn't simply wear a costume hump. He constructed a 70-pound apparatus of concrete and metal that crushed his torso and compressed his internal organs. The device was so torturous he could only endure it for 10 minutes before assistants had to remove it so he could breathe normally. "I found him vomiting blood between takes," recalled director Wallace Worsley. "When I suggested using lighter materials, he refused. Quasimodo suffered, he told me. I must suffer too." His spine never recovered from these sessions. The chronic pain from compressed vertebrae would plague him for the rest of his shortened life. The Phantom of the Opera transformation pushed Chaney into even more dangerous territory. He inserted thin wires directly into his nostrils, pulling them upward and outward to create the Phantom's skeletal appearance. Painful hooks placed inside his mouth pulled his cheeks back to expose his teeth in a permanent grimace. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Crew members would recoil when he approached between takes. Most shocking was the chemical makeup he applied around his eye sockets. The substances, containing harsh acids, burned his skin to achieve that sunken, death-like appearance. The result was temporary blindness that lasted hours after each shooting day, leaving him helpless and disoriented. For London After Midnight, Chaney reached his most extreme point. He inserted sharpened wires around his gum line to create the vampire's fanged appearance. The puncture wounds became severely infected, leading to blood poisoning that hospitalized him for 2 weeks. The studio attributed his absence to exhaustion, protecting their investment while dismissing his suffering. The cumulative damage from these transformations systematically destroyed Chaney's immune system. His body, weakened by years of self-inflicted trauma, became vulnerable to the pneumonia that killed him at just 47 years old. His final words reportedly acknowledged the terrible bargain he had made with his craft. "I've created monsters. Now they've created me." The king's painful crown, Clark Gable. The agony behind America's smile. Hollywood's ultimate leading man carried a secret so humiliating it would have destroyed his virile image had audiences discovered the truth. The famous Gable smile that made women swoon across America was entirely artificial and a source of constant, excruciating pain. By age 32, severe periodontal disease had ravaged Gable's mouth, requiring the complete extraction of all his teeth. The ill-fitting dentures he received created a cascade of medical problems that plagued him throughout his career. Daily infections required constant medication, while persistent ulcers made eating a torturous experience. Kissing him was like pressing your lips against a hot stove, Vivien Leigh confided to her private diary during Gone with the Wind filming. The fever from his infected gums radiated through those artificial teeth. The dentures created practical nightmares during production. They produced a subtle whistle during dialogue that sound technicians worked tirelessly to eliminate in post-production. More devastating was the chronic halitosis that made intimate scenes unbearable for his co-stars. Joan Crawford developed a technique of dabbing peppermint oil inside her nostrils before romantic scenes, a trick she discreetly shared with other actresses forced to endure Gable's condition. Director Victor Fleming invented an entirely new filming technique during Gone with the Wind specifically to accommodate Gable's dental problems. Close-up switching, where romantic shots were filmed with stand-ins wearing identical clothing seen only from behind, became standard practice. This innovation, later adopted throughout Hollywood, originated solely to minimize Gable's time wearing his painful prosthetics during intimate scenes. The psychological impact proved even more crushing than the physical pain. Despite his public bravado, Gable's confidence crumbled in private. He avoided restaurants, developed a habit of covering his mouth when laughing, a gesture fans interpreted as modesty, but was actually desperate concealment of his fear that his dentures might shift visibly. The cruelest irony emerged in his personal relationships. His fifth wife, Kay Williams, later revealed that the man known for making women melt with his smile spent every night soaking his teeth in a glass beside their bed. He lived in constant terror that someone might witness this ritual and discover the artificial nature of his most famous asset. The King of Hollywood wore a crown of pain, his every public appearance a performance of perfection built on a foundation of medical misery that no amount of fame could heal. The rebel's silent struggle. James Dean, cool detachment, born of disability. The epitome of rebellious cool was actually masking sensory impairments that fundamentally shaped his legendary screen presence. James Dean's famous squint wasn't an attitude. It was necessity born of severe myopia that left him nearly blind without thick glasses he was forbidden to wear on camera. During Rebel Without a Cause, director Nicholas Ray discovered Dean couldn't see the marks on the floor that indicated where he should stand for each shot. The production developed an elaborate system where crew members physically positioned him before every take, then quickly retreated out of frame. He was essentially performing blind, Ray later admitted. That vulnerable quality everyone responded to. Part of it was genuine disorientation as he tried to make sense of the blurry shapes around him. More significant than his visual impairment was Dean's partial hearing loss, which made conventional direction nearly impossible. Unable to clearly hear cues on noisy film sets, Dean developed his distinctive delayed reaction timing. What audiences interpreted as artistic choice was actually him taking extra moments to process what he had heard. This communication barrier fueled his reputation for being difficult. When Dean asked for repeated instructions or seemed to ignore direction, studios attributed it to method acting intensity rather than acknowledge his sensory limitations. The misunderstanding created a vicious cycle. Frustrated by constantly missing crucial information, Dean retreated into isolation between scenes, reinforcing his brooding loner image. The emotional toll was devastating. Dean confided to friend Dennis Hopper, "Everyone thinks I'm being difficult when I'm just trying to understand what's happening. I'm always a beat behind everyone else, always catching up." His most famous line from Rebel Without a Cause, "I'm involved now," carried deeply personal significance beyond the script. It expressed his constant struggle to remain connected in a world where sensory barriers left him perpetually disconnected, despite his desperate desire to belong. The studio system that profited from his alienated screen persona actively prevented him from addressing the very conditions that created it. Insurance policies excluded coverage for performers with known disabilities, making revelation of his impairments potentially career-ending in an era without disability protection laws. This cruel exploitation ended only with Dean's death at 24, leaving behind a legend built on authentic struggle that Hollywood never allowed him to acknowledge or properly address. The double deception. Merle Oberon. Beauty, scars, and erased identity. Hollywood's exotic beauty lived a double life of deception that required daily pain to maintain both her career and her carefully constructed identity. The 1937 car accident that nearly ended Merle Oberon's career left devastating damage far worse than the public ever knew. The impact had shattered her cheekbone and severed crucial facial nerves, leaving her unable to control muscles on the left side of her face. Half her face remained essentially paralyzed, creating constant fear that cameras would capture her facial drooping at unguarded moments. Her husband, cinematographer Lucien Ballard, didn't just help with flattering lighting. He invented entirely new technology to save her career. The Obi light, mounted directly on cameras to cast shadowless illumination, was specifically designed to conceal her damaged features. This innovation, still used in filmmaking today, was never acknowledged as disability accommodation, but presented merely as a flattering technique. She couldn't feel when she was drooling on that side, her longtime makeup artist later revealed. Between every take, someone had to quickly dab her face without the crew noticing. She lived in terror of the camera catching her facial drooping. But Oberon's scarring concealed an even more closely guarded secret: her mixed-race heritage. Born in India to an Anglo-Indian mother, her success depended entirely on hiding her true ethnicity. In an era when leading ladies were exclusively white, each morning began with layers of chemical whitening makeup to lighten her naturally brown skin. The harsh bleaching agents caused painful rashes and progressive skin damage that compounded her facial injuries. The psychological torment of this double deception nearly destroyed her mentally. During filming of Wuthering Heights, she suffered a complete nervous breakdown when director William Wyler demanded brighter lighting that would have revealed both her scarring and her actual skin tone. Production halted for 3 days, while the studio fabricated a story about exhaustion, protecting their investment while dismissing her authentic suffering. The ultimate tragedy occurred when she visited her birthplace years later. Arriving in Bombay for a film premiere, Oberon was confronted by relatives eager to reconnect with their famous family member. She denied knowing them, maintaining her fabricated Tasmanian origins even as tears streamed down her scarred face. The trauma of publicly rejecting her own blood relatives haunted her until her death. "I don't know who I am anymore," she confessed to her final husband. "The face in my mirror isn't mine, and neither is the history they've given me." The Invisible Prison, Jean Tierney. Beauty hiding. Inner darkness. Hollywood's perfect face masked sensory challenges and mental health struggles that made every performance a triumph over invisible disabilities that threatened to destroy her career at any moment. Jean Tierney's severe colorblindness wasn't merely an inconvenience. It fundamentally altered how she experienced her profession. Unable to distinguish red from green, she navigated film sets like minefields of potential embarrassment. Costume fittings became exercises in humiliation as designers discussed color palettes she couldn't comprehend. "I learned to recognize fabrics by texture and memorize which costumes represented which colors," she later wrote. "I lived in constant terror of someone asking how I liked the red dress when I couldn't tell if it was red or green." During filming of Leave Her to Heaven, this invisible disability created a crisis. Tierney's character needed to identify a specific red boat in a harbor scene. Unable to distinguish it from others, she memorized its position beforehand, only to discover the props department had rearranged the boats between rehearsal and filming. Her resulting confusion led to public humiliation from the director before a crew member discreetly realized the issue and helped her. More devastating were her mental health struggles, severe depression and bipolar disorder that created additional layers of disability. When mood episodes interfered with filming, studios administered what they called vitamin injections, actually unregulated cocktails of amphetamines and barbiturates designed to force her to perform regardless of her psychological state. These dangerous medications triggered the severe breakdown that led to her institutionalization and subsequent electroconvulsive therapy treatments. The procedures, crude by today's standards, damaged her memory and created yet another disability she had to overcome in silence. When she returned to acting, she could no longer memorize dialogue, requiring cue cards for even the shortest scenes. The beautiful face that launched her career became a prison when it remained unchanged while her mind deteriorated, creating the cruel public expectation that her perfect exterior should contain an equally perfect interior. The studio physicians who administered those vitamins knew exactly what they were doing to me, she later told her daughter. They were calculating how many films they could extract before I completely broke down. The woman celebrated for her flawless beauty spent decades battling invisible disabilities, while industry executives exploited her vulnerabilities for profit, treating her mental health as disposable as long as her face remained marketable. The Daredevil's Secret. Harold Lloyd. Death-defying stunts with a hidden handicap. The man who dangled from skyscraper clocks was concealing an injury that made his death-defying stunts exponentially more dangerous than audiences could ever imagine. In 1919, a prop bomb exploded in Harold Lloyd's right hand, blowing off his thumb and index finger in what was publicly described as a minor accident. The reality was far more severe. Beyond the missing digits, the explosion had severely damaged nerves throughout his right hand, leaving him with limited sensation and drastically reduced grip strength in his remaining fingers. Lloyd's solution was ingenious yet torturous: a custom-made prosthetic glove that concealed his missing digits while appearing natural on camera. What audiences never suspected was that this prosthetic severely compromised his ability to grip objects, making his famous building climbing stunts in films like Safety Last exponentially more perilous. Each handhold was agony and terror combined, his stunt coordinator later revealed. He had essentially 3 functioning fingers to support his entire body weight. One slip, and he would have fallen to his death. The psychological impact ran deeper than physical limitation. Lloyd became obsessed with proving his capability despite his disability, deliberately choosing increasingly dangerous stunts, specifically because studio executives had suggested he might not manage them with his injury. During filming of his iconic clock-hanging sequence, Lloyd refused safety measures that wouldn't be visible on camera. With severely limited grip strength, he clung to the minute hand with his full body weight exposed to a potentially fatal fall. The shot that defined his career was also his most defiant statement about living with disability. "The studio wanted to retire me to directing after the accident," Lloyd confided to a colleague years later. "Every time I dangle from a building, I'm showing them and myself that I'm not diminished. I'd rather fall to my death than be shelved because of my hand." The prosthetic itself became a source of ongoing suffering. Made of restrictive materials that didn't breathe, it caused painful skin infections and restricted circulation during long shooting days. Yet removing it was unthinkable. His contract specifically forbade being photographed without it, with substantial financial penalties for exposing his disability. Lloyd's determination to conceal his injury wasn't merely professional pride, but economic survival. Insurance companies refused coverage for performers with known disabilities, making revelation of his condition potentially career-ending in an era before disability protection laws existed. The Count's hidden agony. Bela Lugosi, Dracula's real-life torment. The definitive Count Dracula performed through physical agony that unknowingly shaped his iconic portrayal, creating cinema's most famous monster through authentic human suffering. Bela Lugosi's distinctive stiff-legged vampire walk wasn't an artistic choice. It was the only way he could move without collapsing in excruciating pain. Severe sciatica from World War I injuries had left him with permanent nerve damage that made normal movement torturous. Each scene required increasing doses of morphine to control the waves of agony shooting through his spine. Between takes, he would grip the set furniture until his knuckles turned white, recalled a crew member from Dracula. The moment the director called cut, assistants would rush in with his cane and medication. Then he'd compose himself and transform back into the untouchable Count when cameras rolled again. His thick Hungarian accent, which became his trademark in lines like, "I never drink wine," concealed a more significant challenge. Lugosi had suffered traumatic brain injury during the war that affected his language processing abilities. His coping method, memorizing dialogue phonetically without fully understanding meaning, created his distinctive halting delivery that became synonymous with cinematic horror. Most debilitating was his severe myopia. Lugosi was legally blind without thick glasses he couldn't wear on camera. His famous hypnotic stare resulted from desperately straining to focus on faces he could barely see. The combined effects of pain medication and visual impairment made navigating sets treacherous. He frequently injured himself walking into props and equipment he couldn't see clearly. Universal Studios recognized that Lugosi's painful movement and intense concentration created a uniquely unsettling screen presence perfect for horror roles. Rather than acknowledging his disabilities, executives marketed them as brilliant acting choices, leaving Lugosi unable to reveal the authentic sources of his distinctive performance style. The studio's exploitation reached its cruelest point during Dracula filming, when executives refused to adjust shooting schedules despite his obvious suffering. Director Todd Browning finally intervened after finding Lugosi unconscious from pain between scenes, demanding schedule modifications to accommodate his condition. The morphine initially prescribed for legitimate pain management eventually led to the addiction that devastated his later career. As his health deteriorated and his disabilities became more pronounced, Hollywood abandoned him to poverty and obscurity. Yet even in his darkest moments, Lugosi maintained dignity about his conditions. When a young fan once asked about his distinctive walk, he replied with characteristic grace, "The monsters I play suffer physically. I understand their pain." The trembling icon. Katharine Hepburn. Nobility disguising. Neurological disorder. Hollywood's aristocratic icon built her legendary career while battling a progressive neurological condition that threatened to expose her vulnerability at any unguarded moment. Katharine Hepburn's essential tremor began in her early 30s, involuntary neurological trembling that affected both her head and hands, with increasing severity over time. Rather than acknowledge this condition, MGM executives dismissed her shaking as unprofessional nervousness when her hands visibly trembled during crucial scenes. Her adaptation was nothing short of brilliant. Hepburn developed her distinctive speaking style, clipped, rapid delivery with unusual emphasis patterns, specifically to distract audiences from her head tremors. She pioneered the use of pockets in women's costumes to conceal hand trembling and created the fashion trend of high necklines and scarves that provided support to reduce visible neck movement. "Watch any Hepburn film with the sound off," suggested her longtime cinematographer. "You'll notice she's constantly in purposeful motion. That wasn't an acting choice but necessity. If she kept moving deliberately, the involuntary movements became invisible." Director George Cukor became her greatest ally, developing innovative filming techniques that accommodated her condition while enhancing her performances. He introduced more movement into scenes, used specific camera angles that minimized tremor visibility, and fought with studios to allow longer takes so Hepburn could find her natural rhythm without constant interruptions that exacerbated her symptoms. The emotional cost was tremendous. Hepburn's famous independence stemmed partly from medical necessity. She refused dinner invitations and social events where her tremor might become obvious to strangers. Her reputation for being difficult originated from her insistence on specific accommodations she couldn't explain without revealing her condition. "I'm not eccentric," she confided to Spencer Tracy during their long relationship. "I'm strategic. Every choice I make is calculated around controlling what people see." Most painfully, studio executives used her condition as leverage, threatening exposure when she demanded better roles or improved working conditions. This cruel exploitation contributed to her 5-year absence from Hollywood after being labeled box office poison, a period when her tremor significantly worsened without the constant stress of concealment. Hepburn's triumph over this progressive neurological disorder, while building one of cinema's most distinguished careers, represents an extraordinary feat of adaptation and willpower. The very mannerisms audiences came to adore, her distinctive speech patterns, elegant scarves, and energetic movements, were all carefully crafted strategies to conceal a disability that industry insiders cruelly suggested would make her unemployable. The wheelchair. Pioneer Lionel Barrymore, breaking barriers through necessity. The beloved character actor's visible disability became Hollywood's first openly acknowledged physical difference, but only after studios exhausted every cruel alternative to maintain the illusion of his physical normalcy. Lionel Barrymore's mobility challenges began with severe arthritis in the early 1930s, but MGM initially demanded complete concealment at any cost. The reality was far more devastating than publicly acknowledged. Beyond arthritis, Barrymore had suffered a broken hip that never properly healed due to persistent bone infection, causing permanent structural damage to his entire pelvic region. The studio's first solution was medical torture disguised as accommodation. They required Barrymore to perform while wearing painful metal braces beneath his clothing that forced his damaged joints to bear weight unnaturally. These medieval devices caused excruciating pain, but maintained the illusion of normalcy for cameras. He would collapse the moment he reached his dressing room, recalled his regular stand-in. His undergarments were often soaked with blood where the braces had cut into his skin, yet he'd compose himself and return for the next scene without a single complaint. When his condition deteriorated beyond what even torturous braces could mask, MGM faced an unprecedented choice: lose one of their most valuable character actors or acknowledge his disability publicly. They reluctantly chose visibility, but with calculated limitations designed to minimize financial risk. Barrymore's wheelchair use would be incorporated into his roles, but studio publicity would attribute it to a specific heroic injury rather than acknowledge the progressive nature of his condition. This maintained the comforting fiction that disability was only acceptable as a temporary, externally caused state rather than an inherent human variation. Even this grudging accommodation came with financial exploitation. MGM significantly reduced Barrymore's salary upon his transition to wheelchair roles, claiming his limited capacity justified lower compensation despite his continuing box office appeal and undiminished acting abilities. When he protested this discriminatory treatment, executives threatened suspension without pay, knowing his extensive medical expenses left him financially vulnerable and unable to seek work elsewhere. The psychological impact proved complex and contradictory. While relieved to finally work without hiding his condition, Barrymore struggled with becoming Hollywood's singular disabled performer. Directors often treated him as fragile or incapable, overlooking his extensive classical training in favor of one-dimensional characters defined primarily by their wheelchair use. His most famous role as the villainous Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life represented both progress and harmful stereotyping. While his disability was openly visible on screen, it was explicitly linked to moral corruption, reinforcing dangerous cultural connections between physical difference and character defects. Despite these significant challenges, Barrymore's continued presence in major films created crucial precedent. He became Hollywood's first major star to openly continue his career with a visible mobility disability, creating representation that, while imperfect, challenged the industry's obsession with physical perfection and opened doors previously sealed shut. The Price of Perfection and the Path Forward. These 10 stories from Hollywood's golden age reveal far more than individual courage. They expose an entire system built on the systematic exploitation of human vulnerability. Behind the glamorous facades projected on screens across America existed real people navigating pain, limitation, and psychological trauma while creating performances that defined American culture for generations. The physical toll was matched only by the emotional devastation. Imagine living in constant fear that your disability might be exposed, knowing such revelation could instantly end the career you had sacrificed everything to build. Imagine performing through excruciating pain while being told your discomfort was insignificant compared to the studio's financial investment in your image. Most remarkably, many of cinema's most iconic performance elements originated as disability adaptations. Lugosi's distinctive movement, Dean's reactive timing, Hepburn's speech patterns, audiences fell in love with techniques that began as necessary accommodations, transforming limitation into innovation that forever changed screen acting. What emerges from these hidden histories is profound testament to human resilience. These performers didn't just succeed despite their conditions. They revolutionized their craft through adaptations born of necessity, creating artistic legacies that endure precisely because they arose from authentic human experience rather than manufactured perfection. Today, as Hollywood slowly evolves toward authentic disability representation, these stories provide both inspiration and stark warning. They remind us how far the industry has progressed while demonstrating how much work remains to create spaces where physical difference is neither hidden nor exploited, but simply accepted as part of human diversity. The true magic of these legendary performances lies not in their flawlessness, but in the extraordinary human spirit that transformed pain into art, limitation into innovation, and difference into enduring distinction. If these hidden stories moved you, subscribe to join us in uncovering more untold histories behind cinema's greatest legends. Share your thoughts on which revelation most surprised you, and help us continue exploring the authentic human experiences that created the movies we still love today.